Welcome back to Media and Information Literacy. For our second lesson, we will be discussing the evolution of media from traditional to new media. For our first topic, we will be talking about media and its different roles to the society. The next part of our discussion would involve a walkthrough on the evolution of media in four critical periods in history. But before anything else, let us recall what media is. Media, once again, is described or defined as the different channels or ways that we use to transmit or communicate messages. Simply put, we refer to this as communication tools. Many of you are probably wondering, why do we even have to talk about media over and over again? Why do we have to discuss media? Why is it so important that we have a dedicated class for it? Now, media actually fulfills several different roles in our society, which includes the following. First and foremost, media could be used to entertain and provide an outlet for the imagination. So not only does it make us laugh, make us cry, it is also a channel that we could use to express our own creativity. Next up, media could also be used in our society for education and information dissemination. Next, media also serves as a public forum for the discussion of important issues. Media serves as a platform or a way for us to get involved in things that concern us as public citizen. Next up, media is also important because not only does it allow us to become involved in public concerns, media also becomes our very own big brother, okay? Media is somehow acting as an eye or a watchdog for all government, business, and other institutions. Media is the one observing what is happening in the society around us. And it is also the one reporting to the concerned public what is happening, what is the situation. Media actually has been around for so long. And in our history, there are four critical time periods wherein media evolved and flourished. There are very distinct developments in the use of media. In the discussion of the evolution of media, we divided it into four critical time periods. The first period is the pre-industrial age, or the years before 1700s. Then we also have the industrial age from 1700s to 1930s. Next up, we have the electronic age from 1930s to the 1980s. And the so-called information age, which occurred mid-1900s to 2000s and even extending until now. Let us first go to the pre-industrial age or before the 1700s. If we were to describe the developments in the society during this time, this is the time period wherein people first discovered fire. They also were able to develop paper from plants and forge weapons and tools with stone, bronze, copper, and iron. So it's very ancient. However, even if that is the case, they have limited resources compared to the resources that we have right now. There are still many different forms of media present back then. For example, we get to know the lives of those before us through cave paintings. And these paintings date back to as far as 35,000 BC. These cave paintings also include pictographs and petroglyphs. Pictographs are images that are drawn using, for example, ink that they got from plants, from animal blood, for example, whereas petroglyphs refer to carvings on caves or carvings on stone. As time went on, around 2500 BC, as civilizations were rising and developing in the Middle East, particularly in the region of Egypt, people have started to communicate, to draw things in papyrus or use papyrus in communication. In another region at around 2400 BC, particularly in Mesopotamia, clay tablets were used. In Rome, on the other hand, they have the Acta Diurna. Acta Diurna actually acted as the first newspaper. It's actually considered an ancient newspaper. It acted as a form of communication between the Roman Empire and the public. So this is a kind of a newspaper that they produce that tells about the things that the government is doing or the rules that the government are implementing. Around the second century in China, they also have the Gibao. Same as the Acta Journa, this also served as an official newspaper. During the 5th century in the Mayan region, they also have the Codex. The Codex was used by the Mayan to document their lives, to document their culture. That is why when these were discovered, we get to know about this particular ancient civilization. Around 220 AD, many printing press, particularly in East Asian cultures or in East Asian countries such as China, Japan, and Korea, many printing press producing text materials during that time use wood blocks in order to imprint ink on paper instead of writing everything over and over again. After some time, the industrial age rolled in. During the 1700s to the 1930s, the industrial revolution actually led people to use and harness the power of steam. And because of that, they were able to develop machinery and other tools, industrial tools. Similarly, also establishing iron production and the manufacturing of various products. So during the industrial revolution or during the industrial age, factories were built. Production was on the rise. So it's mass production, meaning producing many things at the same time, particularly for the benefit of public consumption. Take, for example, around the 19th century, printing press for mass production or mass producing newspapers and other forms of text materials or reading materials were already on the rise. So they have been using the movable printer for this one. In the 1600s, the concept of the newspaper that we know now started. So newspaper production started during this time as well. Take, for example, in 1665, the modern newspaper was produced, and that was in the form of the London Gazette. In the 1800s, the typewriter was invented and introduced to the public. Around the 1840s, the telegraph was invented and used. And in 1876, Alexander Graham Bell first sent a message via the telephone. In 1890, the concept of motion pictures or moving pictures was introduced and was very popular back then. And after only a few years, sound was added to these motion pictures or to these moving pictures that brought about the development and production of sound films. Other forms of communication also involve punch cards, which is quite similar to how telegraphs work. However, these punch cards are used mainly for computing or for computing processes. Once the 1930s rolled in, it was the start of the electronic age, and this extended until the 1980s. So during this time, the invention of the transistor ushered in the electronic age, meaning the use of electricity, the very part of an electronic gadget that enables it to function using electricity. People harness the power of transistors. So many of the things that they use to communicate, many of the media forms that were developed during that time were powered by electricity. So take, for example, in the 1950s, electricity from batteries powered the transistor radio. In the early to mid 1940s as well, commercial television was made available, meaning many homes in different places around the world had access to a television. They could buy and own a television. From the late 1940s to early 1950s, however, large electronic computers were invented. This includes, for example, in 1947, the EDSAC or the Electronic Delay Storage Automatic Calculator, and the UNIVAC 1 in 1951, which stands for Universal Automatic Computer 1. So these two machines were used to process large number of data, more often than not, numerical data. In 1960s, mainframe computers were introduced. Around the late 1960s, however, personal computers become popular. So these are computers that you could also buy and own for yourself and use it for personal purposes and not just for industry use like the very first computers. One of the very first personal computers that were made available to the public was the Hewlett Packard 9100A and also the development of the Apple One. Around the late 1950s and early 1960s, overhead projectors were also popular. So overhead projectors or OHPs were very popular, particularly in schools and offices. From mid to late 1980s, LCD projectors somehow replaced the popularity of overhead projectors. The many and quick development and advancements during that time also opened the door for another important or critical part of media evolution. We could refer to this time period as the information age. During this time, the internet paved the way for faster communication and the creation of the social network. So the internet was first introduced during the information age. Once we were connected to the internet, web browsers were made available to us. There are many different examples of web browsers. Some are not available anymore. Some we still get to enjoy them. So take for example, the very first web browser is actually called the World Wide Web. And that was first developed or introduced to the public in 1990. And then came Mosaic. We also have the Internet Explorer at the year 1995. Then Opera came in 1996, Safari in 2003, Firefox in 2004, Google Chrome in 2008, and MS Edge or Microsoft Edge in 2015. A big part of the internet is, of course, the search engines because search engines are the ones that we use to look for information found on the World Wide Web. It is important to note, however, that different regions around the world also have different search engine preferences. Here are some of the most common search engines that we use. We have, of course, Google Search, which was first introduced in 1997, Yahoo Search in 1995, and Bing in 2009. During the information age, there was also a rise in the use of blogging sites or in the creation of blogging sites. Blogging sites could have many different themes, they could follow many different formats, and they could be used for many different purposes. Some blogging sites include Open Diary, which was considered to be the very first blogging site, which was introduced in 1998. Blogger, which is still available right now in 1999. Live Journal, if you would still remember, in 1999 as well. Sangha in 2000. And WordPress, which we also still get to enjoy right now in 2003. As I have previously mentioned, the information age also paved the way to the creation of the social network. Even up to this day, social networking sites are still on the rise and are still being utilized. Social networks allow us to connect to different people, not only to the people that we know, but also to people who may be thousands and thousands of miles away from us. The very first known or documented social networking site is called 6 Degrees, which was first introduced in 1997. We also have Friendster in 2002, LinkedIn in 2003, MySpace at the same year, Multiply in 2004, Facebook was first introduced in 2004, and then we also have Google Plus, which was the most recent in 2011. Sharing of information, sharing of thoughts, sharing of ideas have also become easier as time went on through the development or the rise of microblogging site. What makes a microblogging site different from a blogging site? Usually in microblogging sites, there is a limited amount of characters involved. So you could only post as much as the restrictions that they have imposed on their particular site. Some would only have space for 150 characters, 250 characters, or even less. Take for example, we have Twitter, which was first introduced in 2006, Tumblr introduced in 2007, and then we also have this thing called Plurk in 2008. So even until now, some of these are still popular, such as Twitter, which is still used, and Tumblr, of course. Another media platforms that were introduced during the information age also include photo and video sharing websites. Now, of course, in photo and video sharing websites, you could only share photos or videos. For example, you have Flickr in 2004. Vimeo was first introduced in 2004 as well. YouTube, a video streaming website, is also introduced in 2005. Pinterest in 2009. Instagram in 2010. Snapchat in 2011. Vine was first introduced in 2012. And TikTok, that is very popular right now, is introduced in 2016. With the development and production and the availability of many different gadgets all over the world, instant messaging and video conferencing were also on the rise. Particularly now that we are in a pandemic, this is the only way we could communicate with other people. So take for example, in 1998, Yahoo Messenger was first introduced. Skype was introduced in 2003, WhatsApp in 2009, Viber in 2010, WeChat in 2011, Facebook Messenger was introduced in 2011 as well. Zoom was first introduced in 2011, but we only get to enjoy its benefits right now. Telegram was first developed in 2013, and Google Meet was first introduced in 2007. Similarly, portable computers were also made available to the public, such as the laptop in 1981, the pocket PC in 2000, tablets were sold into around 2000 as well, netbooks around 2007. And who could not forget, of course, the power of the mobile phone, something that was and is commonly being used right now to communicate to other people or to reach out to other people. If we are going to look at the history of the mobile phone, it started, of course, with the portaphone or the portable phone in 1983, which looks like a huge chunk of brick. As time went on, it becomes smaller and smaller in size, but with more and more features. So the handset was introduced in 1991, which could do calls and send text messages. Then a few years after that, color display phones became popular. Around 2000, it was not enough for people to just simply do calling and texting with their mobile phones. They also need to take pictures with it. So the first camera phone was introduced during this time. Then just a few years later, with developments and advancements in communication infrastructure, the 3G phone was first introduced. Around 2007, the first touchscreen phone was sold to the public. And of course, starting 2011, we now have the smartphone, which we could use for many different purposes, not just texting, not just calling, and not just simply taking pictures. That's why it's called a smartphone in the first place. Right now, there is a rise in the production and consumption of wearable technology. This includes the calculator watch, which was very much popular when I was young, the Walkman in 1979 for some music anytime. And then in 2004, the first smartwatch was sold to the public. And in 2015, we have the wireless earbuds. Aside from wearable technology, advancements in data processing also enabled us to store data, huge amounts of data and information without the need for a physical infrastructure. And that is what we refer to as cloud. So in 2007, for example, Dropbox was first introduced, wherein you could store your files in the internet or via the internet. OneDrive was also introduced in 2007. Similarly, iPhones and other Apple devices got their iCloud in 2011 as well, and Google Drive in 2012. Here are my sources and references for this lecture. Thank you for joining me.